The cruelest thing about being invisible is that everyone thinks they can laugh while looking straight at you. Laughter rolled across the ballroom like a wave of champagne bubbles and polished arrogance. For a second, I thought it had nothing to do with me. Then I heard the words. She must eat the profits. More laughter followed. Softer this time. Sharper somehow. The kind that hid behind expensive smiles and designer dresses. I kept walking. The silver tray balanced steadily in my hands despite the heat creeping into my face. 26 years old, and I had learned something important about humiliation. If you stopped moving, it caught up with you. The Grand Lexington Hotel looked like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from ceilings painted with gold leaf details. White marble floors reflected thousands of tiny lights. Every table was covered with fresh roses flown in from California. Somewhere above me, a string quartet played a version of an old Frank Sinatra song, while Manhattan's skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. It was the kind of place where people spent more money on one evening than I earned in 6 months. And tonight, I was serving them drinks. Table 14 needs another bottle, my manager whispered as he passed me. And smile, Charlotte. I almost laughed. Smiling had become part of the uniform. Black dress, black shoes, black apron. Smile. No matter what people said. No matter how they looked at you. No matter how many times they assumed a woman my size couldn't possibly belong in a room like this. Of course, I said. My voice sounded calm. That surprised me. Because inside, I was tired. Tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. 3 jobs. Community college classes. Rent due next week. An aging Honda with a transmission that sounded worse every month. Some mornings I woke up feeling like life was a treadmill stuck on maximum speed. But quitting wasn't an option. So I carried trays. I memorized wine lists. I smiled. Near the center of the ballroom, a group of women sat around one of the premium tables. Diamonds sparkled on their wrists and necks whenever they moved. They looked perfect, flawless, like people who had never worried about grocery bills or overdue utility notices. As I approached with a fresh bottle of wine, one of them looked me up and down. Slowly, deliberately. See, she said to her friends. That's exactly why I never eat dessert. The table erupted again. My fingers tightened around the bottle. Not enough for anyone to notice. Just enough to remind myself I was still standing. Still breathing. Still here. I poured the wine carefully and thanked them when they ignored me. Then I turned away before they could see the disappointment in my eyes. Across the ballroom, another burst of laughter rose into the air. Different voices. Different table. Same feeling. Tonight, I wasn't Charlotte Brooks. I was the joke. The cautionary tale. The woman everyone felt comfortable judging because they assumed she didn't matter. I reached the service station near the back wall and exhaled slowly. The cool air from a nearby vent brushed against my face. For a moment, I closed my eyes. Just a moment. Then something changed. I felt it before I understood it. Conversations shifted. Waiters stopped moving as quickly. Guests straightened in their seats. A strange silence spread through parts of the room, subtle but undeniable. The way the atmosphere changes right before a thunderstorm. My eyes opened. Near the grand entrance, people were turning their heads towards someone who had just arrived. I couldn't see him clearly from where I stood. Only dark fabric, broad shoulders, several men following behind. Yet somehow, every person in the ballroom seemed aware of him. Even the women who had mocked me seconds earlier had gone quiet. And for the first time all night, nobody was laughing. The man stepped through the entrance as if the entire building belonged to him. Maybe it did. From where I stood near the service station, I could only see fragments at first. A tailored black suit. Dark hair touched by the glow of the chandeliers. Men walking several steps behind him with the quiet confidence of people who knew exactly where they belonged. Yet none of that explained the reaction. Conversations softened. Laughter faded. Even the string quartet seemed quieter somehow. It was strange how power worked. Nobody announced it. Nobody pointed at it. People simply felt it. I grabbed a fresh tray of champagne glasses and forced myself back to work. Whoever he was, he belonged to a world that had nothing to do with me. Wealthy people attended events like this every week. Powerful people shook hands, made deals, smiled for cameras. I was here to refill drinks and collect empty glasses. That was all. Charlotte, my manager, appeared beside me looking unusually nervous. Be careful tonight. I blinked. I am always careful. He glanced toward the ballroom entrance. Just trust me. Then he disappeared before I could ask what that meant. The guests nearest the entrance had already formed a loose circle around the newcomer. Men who had spent the entire evening talking about themselves suddenly seemed eager to listen. Women who had barely acknowledged anyone all night adjusted their posture and smiled brighter. I had seen celebrities before. This felt different. Less excitement. More respect. Maybe even fear. I shook the thought away and headed toward a table near the windows. Outside, Manhattan stretched into the darkness, thousands of lights sparkling across the skyline. Inside, the ballroom smelled of roses, expensive perfume, and food that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Champagne. I asked a couple standing near the glass. They accepted 2 flutes without looking at me. That part was normal. I continued through the crowd, offering drinks, clearing plates, doing everything I could to stay invisible. Unfortunately, invisibility only lasted until something went wrong. As I passed one of the premium tables, a chair shifted unexpectedly. My hip brushed the corner of it. The tray tilted. Not much. Just enough. A single champagne flute slid toward the edge. My stomach dropped. Time slowed. I reached for it instinctively. The glass slipped through my fingers. It hit the marble floor and shattered. The sound cracked through the ballroom like a starter pistol. Every head seemed to turn at once. Heat flooded my face. Of course, one woman muttered loudly. What a surprise. A few nearby guests laughed. Not many. Just enough. The kind of laughter people use when they want to remind someone where they stand. I crouched immediately, gathering the larger pieces before anyone could step on them. I am sorry, I said. I will clean this right away. Maybe carrying trays is too much exercise, another voice said. More laughter followed. My hands froze for half a second. Then I forced myself to keep moving. Pick up the glass. Stay calm. Finish the shift. Pay the rent. That was the plan. It was always the plan. Suddenly the laughter stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Completely. An uncomfortable silence settled over the nearby tables. I looked up. Several guests were staring past me. Not at the broken glass. Not at the women making jokes. At someone standing directly behind them. I followed their gaze. For the first time all evening, I saw him clearly. Tall. Composed. Dark eyes that seemed to notice everything. Vincent Romano. I did not know his name yet. But judging by the way the room reacted to his presence, I had a feeling I was looking at the most important man in the building. And he was looking directly at me. There are moments when an entire room tells you exactly who matters. And moments when it tells you exactly who does not. I was still kneeling beside the shattered champagne glass when the silence settled over the ballroom. Not the comfortable kind. Not the kind created by music ending or conversations fading naturally. This silence felt deliberate. Chosen. I carefully placed the last piece of broken glass onto my tray and stood. Every instinct told me to apologize again and disappear into the kitchen. Instead, I found myself looking straight into the eyes of the man everyone had been watching. He stood about 15 feet away, tall enough to rise above the crowd without trying, calm enough to make everyone around him seem nervous. His suit fit perfectly, but it was not the expensive fabric people noticed first. It was the way he carried himself, like someone completely certain of who he was. The guests nearest him shifted slightly, creating space without being asked. The movement reminded me of water flowing around a stone. Natural. Automatic. His gaze moved from the broken glass to the women who had been laughing. Then back to me. No smile. No judgment. Just observation. A strange feeling settled in my chest. Before I could make sense of it, one of the women from the premium table spoke up. It is really unfortunate, she said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Some people simply are not suited for elegant events. Her friends chuckled. I felt my stomach tighten. The comment was meant for me. Everyone knew it. She knew it. The room knew it. The proper response would have been silence. So I remained silent. Years of working customer service had taught me that some battles cost more than they were worth. The woman lifted her champagne flute and smiled sweetly. Although I suppose confidence is admirable. More laughter followed. Not as loud as before. More cautious now. People kept glancing toward the dark-haired man as if measuring his reaction. I lowered my eyes and adjusted the tray in my hands. One more hour, I told myself. Maybe 2. Then I could go home. My tiny apartment in Queens suddenly felt like paradise. A frozen pizza. A hot shower. No chandeliers. No diamonds. No strangers evaluating my worth between sips of champagne. I turned to leave. Mississippi. The voice stopped me immediately. Deep. Controlled. Impossible to ignore. I looked over my shoulder. The man had not moved. Yet somehow all attention in the ballroom shifted toward him. Even the quartet seemed uncertain whether to continue playing. Yes, sir. My voice came out softer than I intended. His eyes held mine for a moment. Not lingering. Not uncomfortable. Just direct. Are you injured? The question surprised me so much I almost laughed. Of all the things I expected to hear tonight, that was not one of them. I glanced down. A tiny cut on my finger from the broken glass had left a faint line of red near my knuckle. Nothing serious. Barely noticeable. No, sir, I replied. I am fine. He nodded once. The smallest movement. Yet somehow it felt important. The woman who had been making jokes shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time all evening, she looked unsure of herself. The man beside her suddenly became fascinated by his drink. Nobody seemed eager to laugh anymore. The dark-haired stranger continued studying the room with calm precision. Then his attention returned to me. Something unreadable passed through his expression. Not pity. Definitely not pity. Respect, maybe. Curiosity. Before I could decide, another guest approached him, eager to shake his hand. The spell broke. Conversations slowly resumed. Music filled the air again. People exhaled. I turned away and headed toward the service station, trying to ignore the strange feeling lingering in my chest. Because for the first time all night, someone had looked at me as though I mattered. And somehow that felt far more dangerous than being ignored. The orchestra transitioned into a slower melody, and the ballroom seemed to breathe again. Conversations returned. Glasses clinked. Servers moved between tables carrying trays of desserts and coffee. To everyone else, the moment had already passed. To me, it had not. I could still feel the weight of those dark eyes from across the room. Not because they had been intimidating, because they had been different. Most people looked at me and saw my size first. Some saw a waitress. Some saw a mistake taking up space in the wrong room. He had looked at me like none of those things mattered, which made absolutely no sense. Charlotte, my friend Emily, appeared beside me carrying a tray of espresso cups. Her blonde ponytail bounced as she hurried over. What was that? I blinked. What was what? She stared at me. You are kidding, right? Apparently. Emily lowered her voice. That was Vincent Romano. The name meant nothing to me. She looked horrified. You have never heard of Vincent Romano? I shook my head. Between classes, rent, work, and trying to survive life in New York, I barely kept up with celebrity news, let alone wealthy businessmen. Emily glanced around nervously before continuing. He owns restaurants, hotels, real estate, shipping companies. Half the people in this room probably answer to him in some way. I laughed softly. So he is rich. Charlotte. She nearly dropped her tray. He is not just rich. Before she could explain further, our manager called her name from across the ballroom. She hurried away, leaving me with more questions than answers. I returned to work. That should have been the end of it. It almost was. For the next 20 minutes, I managed to avoid thinking about Vincent Romano. I refilled water glasses, cleared dinner plates, delivered desserts topped with edible gold flakes that probably cost more than my monthly phone bill. Everything felt normal again. Then I was assigned to serve the VIP section. My stomach sank immediately. 3 guesses who was sitting there. The closer I got, the quieter the room seemed to become. Vincent sat near the center of the table, surrounded by executives, politicians, and investors. Men and women whose faces occasionally appeared on television. Yet somehow he remained the focal point. He was not speaking much, mostly listening, occasionally nodding. The others seemed eager for his approval. I approached carefully. Coffee. Several guests accepted. I moved around the table with practiced efficiency. Do not spill anything. Do not trip. Do not become tonight's entertainment again. When I reached Vincent's seat, he looked up. Thank you, he said simply. 2 ordinary words. Yet none of the other guests had bothered saying them. I managed a polite smile. You are welcome, sir. His gaze lingered for half a second before returning to the conversation. I should have walked away immediately. Instead, something strange happened. One of the women from earlier appeared beside the table. The same woman who had mocked me after the broken glass incident. Her smile was flawless. Her voice sweet enough to hide poison. Vincent, she said warmly. I hope the service has been acceptable tonight. I froze. The question was not about service. Everyone knew it. Her eyes flicked toward me. A challenge wrapped in elegance. Several guests noticed. The conversation slowed. The woman smiled wider. Waiting. Watching. Hoping for something. Vincent looked from her to me. Then he set down his coffee cup. And for the second time that evening, the entire table went silent. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. In a ballroom filled with people who controlled companies, investments, and political influence. Nobody seemed willing to speak first. Vincent Romano rested one hand against the table and looked directly at the woman who had asked the question. His expression never changed. That somehow made it worse. "The service has been excellent," he said calmly. Relief flashed across her face. Too early. Especially from the staff members who continued doing their jobs professionally despite unnecessary distractions. The relief vanished. Around the table, several guests suddenly became interested in their coffee cups. Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. The woman forced a small chuckle. "Well, I am glad to hear that." Vincent nodded once. The conversation was over. At least for him. I stood frozen beside the table holding my tray. Part of me wanted to disappear. Another part could not believe what had just happened. For the first time all evening, someone had drawn a line. Not dramatically, not loudly, just enough to remind everyone that kindness and weakness were not the same thing. "Thank you," I said quietly. I was not even sure why I said it. Vincent glanced up. "For what?" The question caught me off guard. "Nothing." His eyes softened slightly. "You do not need to thank people for basic respect." The words landed somewhere deep inside me. Before I could respond, another guest approached the table to greet him. The moment ended. I moved away quickly, my pulse racing for reasons I could not explain. Back at the service station, Emily looked at me as if I had just returned from another planet. "What happened?" she whispered. "Nothing. Charlotte. Seriously, nothing happened." Emily stared at me for a moment before shaking her head. "That man does not notice people by accident." I laughed nervously. "I am pretty sure he notices everyone." "Maybe." She picked up a tray. "But he defended you. In front of people who are terrified of disagreeing with him." Before I could answer, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. A soft golden glow spread across the dance floor. The orchestra changed songs again. This time the melody was slower. Elegant. Romantic in the old-fashioned sense. Couples began drifting toward the center of the room. Expensive gowns swayed beneath crystal chandeliers. Polished shoes crossed the marble floor. The annual charity dance portion of the gala had officially begun. I watched from a distance while delivering dessert plates. Most of the guests seemed perfectly comfortable stepping into the spotlight. I could not imagine anything worse. Dancing in front of hundreds of strangers sounded like a nightmare. Especially in this room. Especially looking the way I did. The same woman from earlier glided onto the dance floor with a wealthy businessman nearly twice her age. She laughed beautifully, smiled beautifully, moved beautifully. People watched her, admired her. That was how evenings like this were supposed to work. Women like her belonged under chandeliers. Women like me carried trays around them. The realization should have hurt. Instead, it felt familiar. Familiar things lose their power after a while. I was carrying a tray of fresh champagne near the ballroom entrance when I noticed movement across the room. Vincent had risen from his table. Several people immediately approached him. Invitations, greetings, requests for a dance. Even from a distance, I could see it happening. He declined each one politely. A minute later, another woman approached. Then another. Same result. Strange. The most powerful man in the room appeared completely uninterested in being the center of attention. I turned toward the service station again. That was when I felt it. That unmistakable sensation of being watched. Slowly, I looked back over my shoulder. Across the crowded ballroom, Vincent Romano was no longer speaking to anyone. He was looking directly at me. And then he started walking in my direction. For a second, I was convinced he was walking toward someone else. That happens when you spend enough years being overlooked. You automatically assume important people have important destinations. And I was not one of them. I glanced behind me. Nothing. To my left, a marble column. To my right, a service station stacked with trays and linen napkins. No glamorous socialite. No wealthy investor. No celebrity guest. Just me. Vincent Romano continued crossing the ballroom. Conversations faded as he passed. Guests smiled. Hopefully. Several women subtly adjusted their posture, expecting him to stop. He did not. The orchestra played on. The chandeliers scattered golden light across the polished floor. Every step seemed impossibly deliberate. My pulse began to climb. Charlotte, Emily whispered from behind me. Do not look now. He is literally walking toward me. Oh my God. I wanted to laugh. Instead, I gripped the tray tighter. Vincent stopped a few feet away. Up close, he looked even more composed than he had from across the room. Not intimidating exactly. Certain. Like a man who never wasted words because he never had to. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The ballroom suddenly felt much smaller. Miss Brooks. I blinked. You know my name? One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. Your manager does. Fair enough. I opened my mouth to respond, then realized I had no idea what to say to a man like this. Fortunately, he seemed perfectly comfortable with silence. His gaze drifted briefly toward the dance floor, where couples moved beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. Then he looked back at me. Have you danced tonight? The question caught me completely off guard. No. Why not? I almost laughed. Because I work here. That is a practical answer. It is also the correct one. For the first time, I saw genuine amusement in his eyes. It transformed his entire face. Not dramatically, just enough to remind me he was human. I suspect there is another reason. My heart stumbled. The dangerous thing about kind people is that they often notice things everyone else ignores. I am not really the ballroom type, I admitted. Vincent glanced around the room. And what exactly is the ballroom type? I followed his gaze. Elegant gowns. Perfect hairstyles. Designer jewelry worth more than most cars. You know? No, he said calmly. I do not. The honesty in his voice left me unexpectedly speechless. Before I could answer, a familiar voice drifted from nearby. Surely you are not bothering the staff with small talk. The woman from earlier had returned. Her smile looked polished enough for a magazine cover. Several guests nearby immediately became interested in the conversation, watching, waiting, hoping for entertainment. Vincent did not even turn toward her right away. When he finally did, his expression remained perfectly neutral. I was having a conversation. Her smile tightened. Of course. The tension felt invisible, yet unmistakable, like static electricity before a storm. Then the orchestra shifted into a new song. A slower melody floated through the ballroom. Around us, couples drifted toward the dance floor. The woman beside us brightened immediately. I was hoping you might save this dance for me. Several nearby guests leaned in almost imperceptibly. Vincent looked at her, then at the dance floor, then at me. The silence stretched. My stomach dropped. Surely not. There was absolutely no possibility. None. And yet something in his expression told me I was about to become the center of attention in the worst possible way. Vincent extended his hand. Not toward the elegant woman standing beside him. Toward me. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Charlotte, he said quietly, would you do me the honor of this dance? The room disappeared. Not literally. The chandeliers still glowed overhead. The orchestra still played. Hundreds of guests still filled the ballroom. But in that moment, all I could see was the hand Vincent Romano had extended toward me. I stared at it as if it belonged to someone else. Around us, silence spread through the crowd. Curious silence. Shocked silence. The kind of silence people create when they know they are witnessing something unexpected. My heart hammered against my ribs. I cannot, I said softly. Vincent did not lower his hand. Why not? I glanced at the tray I was holding. I am working. It sounded reasonable enough. Professional. Safe. His expression never changed. Then consider this a short break. A few nearby guests exchanged looks. The elegant woman standing beside him looked as though she had swallowed something bitter. I wanted to disappear. Not because of Vincent. Because of everyone else. Every eye in the ballroom seemed fixed on me. Waiting. Judging. Measuring my response. Mr. Romano, I began carefully. I appreciate the invitation, but I do not think that is a good idea. For the first time, genuine curiosity appeared in his eyes. Why? Because people like me do not dance in rooms like this. Because I knew exactly what would happen. The whispers. The stares. The laughter hidden behind polite smiles. Because one wrong step would become tomorrow's joke. I did not say any of that. Instead, I looked down and forced a small smile. Trust me. Vincent was quiet for several seconds. Then he surprised me. Charlotte. His voice remained calm. Are you refusing because you do not want to dance? I hesitated. Or because you are worried about what everyone else thinks? The question landed with uncomfortable accuracy. Heat crept into my face. Around us, The crowd continued pretending not to listen while clearly listening to every word. Vincent glanced briefly around the ballroom, then back at me. That is a dangerous habit. What is? Allowing strangers to decide your worth. The words struck harder than they should have. Maybe because part of me knew he was right. Maybe because I had spent years doing exactly that. Before I could answer, my manager suddenly appeared at my side looking more nervous than I had ever seen him. Charlotte, he said carefully. Everything all right? I immediately seized the lifeline. Yes, absolutely. My manager looked at Vincent. Vincent looked at my manager. Something passed silently between them. Then my manager did something completely unexpected. He smiled. Take 5 minutes. I blinked. What? 5 minutes? He gestured toward my tray. I will cover your section. For a second, I was convinced I had misheard him. The ballroom seemed equally stunned. Vincent remained perfectly calm, as though he had expected this outcome from the beginning. The orchestra continued playing its slow melody. Couples turned beneath the chandeliers. Somewhere across the room, champagne glasses clinked softly. Life continued, yet everything felt different. My manager took the tray from my hands. Suddenly, I had no excuse left. No job duty to hide behind. No practical reason to refuse. Only fear. Fear of becoming the center of attention. Fear of embarrassing myself. Fear of confirming everything those people had been saying all night. Vincent still stood there waiting. Patient. Unhurried. As though my answer genuinely mattered. Not many people had ever given me that kind of respect. I looked at his hand one more time. Then I took a slow breath. And for the first time that evening, I made a decision based on what I wanted instead of what everyone else expected. My fingers trembled for exactly 1 second before I placed my hand in his. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. 100 conversations died at once. The orchestra continued playing, but even the music felt distant compared to the sound of my own heartbeat. Vincent's hand was steady and warm. Nothing dramatic. Nothing possessive. Just a simple gesture that somehow carried enough weight to silence an entire room. You know this is a terrible idea, I whispered as he guided me toward the dance floor. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. Possibly. People are staring. They have been staring all evening. Unfortunately, he had a point. The polished marble floor reflected the golden light from the chandeliers above us. Couples moved gracefully around the room while guests watched from elegantly decorated tables. As Vincent and I stepped into the center of the dance floor, I felt every ounce of confidence I had spent years building begin to wobble. I should warn you, I said nervously. I am not good at this. At dancing. At being watched. Something changed in his expression. Not pity. Understanding. Neither am I. I laughed before I could stop myself. That might be the least believable thing anyone has said tonight. The sound surprised both of us. For a moment, the pressure eased. Vincent guided me into the first steps of the dance. Simple movements. Slow enough that I could follow without embarrassing myself. Around us, the ballroom gradually resumed breathing. Conversations returned in cautious whispers. The world started moving again, yet I could still feel eyes following us from every direction. Relax, Vincent said quietly. Easy for you to say. Not really. I glanced up at him. You own this room. His gaze drifted across the ballroom. No. I simply stopped asking it for permission a long time ago. The words settled into my chest. I thought about all the years I had spent shrinking myself, apologizing before speaking, avoiding photographs, avoiding attention, convincing myself that staying invisible was safer than risking judgment. Maybe it was, but it was not much of a life. We completed another turn across the floor. The elegant woman from earlier stood near one of the tables watching us. Her smile was gone now. So were the smiles of several people who had laughed at me throughout the evening. Strangely, I did not feel victorious. I did not want revenge. I did not want them humiliated. I simply wanted the freedom to exist without becoming a punchline. Vincent seemed to notice where I was looking. You are thinking about them. A little. Do not. That is harder than it sounds. I know. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. The orchestra transitioned into a softer section of the melody. Around us, crystal lights shimmered like stars suspended from the ceiling. Can I ask you something? I said. Of course. Why me? The question had been waiting all evening. Vincent was quiet for a moment, not searching for an answer, choosing one. Finally, he looked directly at me. 3 months ago, during a rainstorm, I saw a woman outside one of my buildings. I frowned slightly. What does that have to do with me? The woman was carrying 2 umbrellas. My confusion deepened. Okay. She gave both of them away. I blinked. A memory surfaced immediately. A freezing April afternoon. 2 elderly strangers waiting for a bus in the rain. That was you. Vincent nodded. I watched you walk 6 blocks home completely soaked. My mouth fell open. You remember that? Yes. The music continued around us. The ballroom faded once again. Because for the first time that night, I realized this was never about a dance. And somehow, that was far more terrifying. The music continued, but I barely heard it anymore. 3 months. Vincent Romano remembered something I had forgotten by the next morning. A rainy afternoon. 2 strangers standing at a bus stop without umbrellas. A small act of kindness that had seemed insignificant at the time. Yet somehow, he had carried that memory all the way into this ballroom. Why? I asked quietly. Why would you remember something like that? Vincent guided me through another slow turn beneath the chandeliers. Around us, couples moved gracefully across the polished floor. The city lights beyond the windows shimmered against the night sky. Because most people only give when it is convenient, he said. You did not. I looked away. It was just an umbrella. No. His voice remained calm. Certain. It was character. Nobody had ever described me that way before. Hardworking, maybe. Reliable. Friendly when I could manage it. But character felt different. Bigger somehow. We moved through another measure of music. The ballroom no longer felt hostile. Strange. Unbelievable. But not hostile. The laughter from earlier seemed very far away now. Not because people had changed. Because I had. Somewhere between taking his hand and stepping onto the dance floor, I had stopped asking permission to exist. Vincent glanced toward one of the nearby tables. Several guests immediately looked away. Others offered polite smiles. The same people who had ignored me for hours suddenly seemed eager to acknowledge my presence. The irony was almost funny. You know what is strange? I asked. What? Nobody is laughing now. A faint smile touched his face. People often follow the example set by the loudest voice in the room. And tonight, that voice is yours. Vincent shook his head. No. His gaze settled on me. Tonight, they are following courage. The orchestra approached the final section of the song. I could hear it building, slowing, preparing to end. For the first time all evening, I wished the moment would last a little longer. Not because of the ballroom, not because of the attention, because for once, I felt seen without feeling judged. As the final notes echoed through the room, applause rose from every direction. Couples separated. Conversations resumed. The evening moved forward. But Vincent did not immediately let go of my hand. Charlotte. Yes. Do not let this room decide who you are tomorrow. My throat tightened unexpectedly. I will try. No. His voice was gentle. You will remember. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then a representative from the charity stepped onto the stage near the orchestra. The microphone crackled softly. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced. Before we conclude tonight's gala, there is one final recognition. The crowd gradually quieted. I expected another donor award, another wealthy sponsor, another speech about generosity. Instead, the speaker smiled toward the dance floor. Toward us. This evening has reminded us that true elegance cannot be purchased. Murmurs spread through the audience. The speaker continued. Jewelry shines. Designer labels impress. Wealth opens doors. But character changes lives. My heart skipped. Vincent remained perfectly still beside me. Tonight, the speaker said, the most beautiful person in this ballroom was not the one wearing the most expensive diamonds. Complete silence settled across the room. Then he looked directly at me. It was the woman who carried herself with dignity when others offered cruelty. Heat flooded my face. I wanted to hide. Instead, something unexpected happened. People began applauding. Slowly at first. Then louder. Table after table. Guest after guest. Even some of the people who had mocked me earlier joined in. Not because they suddenly knew me. Not because I had changed overnight. Because dignity has a way of revealing itself when given the chance. I looked around the ballroom one final time. The same chandeliers. The same marble floors. The same people. Yet everything felt different. Maybe the world had not changed at all. Maybe I had simply learned something important. Some people command a room with money. Some command it with power. But the people others remember are the ones who never stop being kind when kindness costs them something. And for the first time in a very long time, I walked through the ballroom with my head held high.